stance. Okay. What? What are you shaking your head? Are they making comments? So, all right, I'm going to have a pivoted stance. This is a thumb contact on the spinous process, and this is for C7 through T2. If you can get on C6, you can do this adjustment on C6. There are better adjustments for C6, so C7 to T2. And so my hand is going to be in this orientation. I'm on the right side. This is a PR listing. So I'm going to make a tissue push. You can do this with the opposite hand, a tissue push. I want to make sure there's some tissue between me and the spinous process. So I could do a tissue pull with my thumb, or I could do a tissue push with my contact hand. I prefer that. And so I'm going to do a tissue push with my thumb. I'm against the spinous process. This will be a PR listing. I'm going to ask the patient to turn their face to the opposite side of contact. I'm dropping my arm down. My line of correction is going to be lateral to medial on the spinous process, little I to S. And I'm going to find the mastoid process. I'm going to place a thenar on the mastoid process, stabilize the patient's head, and then we'll make the thrust just like this. The thrust is going to, again, come from the pectoralis muscle. The pisiform move is the same thing, but we're going to replace the thumb with a pisiform. So we're going to place a pisiform against the spinous process. Ask the patient to turn their face to that side. We're going to place our thenar on the mastoid process, okay, and we're going to make the thrust just like that. For a modified thumb move, okay, with a modified thumb move, take a step up in your stance. It lets you get over the segment a little bit easier. I'm going to reach across. I'm going to place a thumb contact on the spinous process. Okay. In this case, this would be a PL listing. Okay. Ask the patient to turn their face away from the side of contact. I'm going to drop that arm down, and the thrust is going to be, again, lateral to medial and I to S. Okay. Pisiform move, I'm just going to replace the thumb with the pisiform, okay, against the spinous process. Turn your face to this side. Drop my arm down, and we'll make the thrust just like that. So that would be a modified pisiform. Okay. So, good. All right. So questions about that? This is not done with a drop. I don't know if Dr. Porter talks about utilizing a drop. You may have had some of your chiropractors use a drop with this particular one. But we're teaching it without the drop. So, okay. Good. All right. Why don't we talk about the cross pisiform and a double thenar? So a cross pisiform is going to be done in what segments? T3 to T10, T3 to T10, and so I'm going to stand on the side opposite spinous laterality. So if I have a T6 PL, I'm going to stand on the right side. I'm going to find the transverse process, okay, for that T6. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that TP, and I'm going to do a tissue pull from the spinous up and out to the transverse process. Remember, the transverse process is going to be higher than the spinous process. And so I'm going to do a tissue push, okay, up and out. And I'm going to have a pisiform. I'm going to have a relaxed arch, okay. We're going to have our pisiform on that transverse process. Okay. My fingers for the adjusting hand, okay, more of the force is going to come from this hand is going to be pointing towards the superior. I'm going to find the opposite transverse process. I'm going to support that. And when we make the thrust for T6, the thrust is going to be P to A and I to S. Okay? So that I to S comes from my stance. I'm going to move back in my stance just a little bit. So I'm going to be a little bit low on my stance, and I'm going to have a thrust P to A and I to S. Okay? If we have an open wedge, we're going to torque in our contacts, and then we're going to make a thrust and with a torque from the top of the thrust to the bottom of the thrust. So if I have a PLI with the open wedges on the right side, okay, I'm going to contact the right side, and I'm going to torque in my contacts. So here's the transverse process. I'm going to torque in my contacts like that, torque in my contacts like this. Okay. When I make the thrust, I'm going to torque from the top of the thrust to the bottom of the thrust. So with a cross pisiform, we're going to stand on the side opposite spinous laterality. With a double thenar, we're going to stand on the side of spinous laterality because this is the long lever, and so we're gonna make the thrust with this, with your inferior hand, and your superior hand becomes the support hand. And so the double thenar we're gonna use from T11 through L5, okay? T11 was my line of correction, P to A and I to S. Bottom of the curve, around L2, L3, straight P to A. L4, L5, P to A, and S to I. And when we get the S to I, I'm gonna turn my stance so that I'm standing on the superior. So let's do an upper lumbar, let's say L1, okay, double thenar. If the spinous process is right, I'm standing on the right side. Cross pisiform, if the spinous process is right, I'm standing on the left side. Okay. So I'm gonna stand on the right side, and I'm gonna place a thenar. So the way we do our thenar, we're gonna squeeze our thumb against the side of our hand, okay? And we're gonna tighten up that thenar. I like to make a contact with this part of the thenar, which is close to the proximal and phalangeal joint. You can tuck your thumb under as well, and that causes that joint to stick out a little bit more. But either way, I'm going to make my contact on the mammillary process. I want you to do a tissue push from the spinous out to that mammillary. Mammillary is, remember, in the intertransverse space above. Okay. Make our contact here. And then I'm going to make my contact with my support hand. I'm going to turn my hips into the table. I want my shoulders to be parallel with the patient's shoulders. Okay. And the thrust is going to be P to A and I to S. If it's L3, it's going to be straight P to A. Okay. If it's L4 and L5, I'm just going to turn my stance. Make sure you don't step on the patient's hands. Make my contact, and this would be the thrust right there. Important with this adjustment, make sure that your elbows are in and not out here. Okay, so you want your elbows to be in, and you're gonna make the thrust. If I have an open wedge, I'm gonna torque in my contacts. Okay, so I'll torque in my adjusting hand, torque in my support hand, and when I make the thrust, I'm gonna thrust, and then I'll torque from the top of the thrust to the bottom of the thrust. All right, good. What else do we have for the thoracics?